see you guys. All right. Whew. Yeah, it's powerful. Thank you guys for being part of that. If you're able, would you stand and we'll continue in worship. This isn't the end. We want to just give our attention to the scriptures, and we're actually starting a new teaching series today entitled Questions Jesus Asked. We're just going to be in the Gospels the next 2 months looking at big questions Jesus asked to people. And today we're starting with the question, why are you afraid? So we're in Mark chapter 4, Mark 4, which is the second book in the New Testament if you're looking for it. And we're going to be in verses 35 through 41. All right, Mark 4, verses 35 through 41. This is God's word to you today. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat, and they started out, leaving the crowds behind, although others followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. And they asked one another, "Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him?" This is God's word to you today. You can be seated. Thank you, guys. There is such power in a well-placed question. Wouldn't you agree? Questions can be really powerful, more so than even statements or exchanges of data or information. Can you think about a question that maybe someone's asked you this week or recently, or maybe somewhere deep in your story, a question that stopped you in your tracks and made you think about the deeper things in your heart and your life? This past week, believe it or not, as we're coming into this new series, the questions that Jesus asked, someone asked me one of those types of questions that made me stop and made me think in a deeper way. Some of you know that I still serve in the reserves in the Air Force, and I worked a few days on base this week, and we have a new commander. And whenever you have a new commander, you have a new boss, you're trying to make a good impression. And I had an interview with him, just get to know you type thing. And he asked me just a really easy layup question, "How are you?" It was like a hallway conversation, right? Like, "How's it going? How are you?" And I gave my standard, what do you say to that? Like, "How's it going? How are you?" "It's fine. I'm good." That's what I said. "I'm good." Right? And I hope let's move on to the next thing, and hopefully I got it right. And the question he asked me next stopped me. No one's ever asked me this question in my entire life. So he asked me, "Chris, how are you?" I'm good. "I'm good, sir. I'm good." And then he said, "I wonder how you know you're good." And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that, sir. And he said, "Well, just think about it for a moment. You said you're good. How do you know you're good?" And for the next 20, 30 minutes, I began to talk about, what am I feeling? And why did I answer that I'm good? What is good? And by the end of it, I'm going, maybe I'm not so good. Maybe there's something else going on in my life. It was a really powerful, penetrating question. And that's what questions can do. They can take you deeper into your heart, into your story about what's really going on. Did you know that in the Gospels, right? There's 4 Gospels in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're in Mark today. Jesus in the Gospels recorded asked 307 questions, okay? He preached a lot of sermons. He did a lot of miracles. He healed a lot of people. He asked a lot of questions. And here's what's really cool too. Of the 307 recorded questions in the Gospels, there's only 3 recorded direct answers to the questions that Jesus asked people, that he gave. In other words, he's putting it back on them to answer the question. And why is that? As we'll see in our story today and in the stories the next 2 months, it's to take each of us and the person that was being asked the question deeper into their story, to make them really examine what's going on underneath all of my, I'm good, I'm fine, it's awesome. Why are you good? What is the deeper story happening? And God has always been a master question asker. Like long before Jesus came on the scene, God was already at work and asking questions. Can you think about the very first question that God asked in the Bible? It only takes 3 chapters to get there in Genesis. Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve mess up, right? They do what God explicitly told them not to do. And God comes and he's walking in the garden, presence with him like he always did every day. And he doesn't come down and say, why did you do this? Like we do as parents sometimes. What did you do? Why did you do it? How could you do that to me? He doesn't do that. Do you remember what the question was? Yeah. What a question. Where are you? And he didn't just mean physically, right? Where are we right now? Where are we relationally? What happened? Where are you? Philip Yancey, in his book, it's a great book, Disappointment with God. And in the book, Disappointment with God, he says, all of us, when we're going through a storm, we're going through a crisis, maybe even this week, somebody told you, I don't love you anymore. Maybe you've gone through a divorce. Maybe some of you this week got a diagnosis. There's something in your life that put you right into a storm and a crisis. And Yancey says, when we're in those moments, and we all go through them, you guys have heard me say, we're in one, we're coming out of one, we're getting ready to go into one. And when we're in that, Yancey says, we all ask the question, where are you, God? Don't you love me? How could you leave me here? How could you let me go through this? Where are you? And Yancey brilliantly says, and God's asking us the exact same question. Where are you? The same question that he asked in the very first storm crisis in Genesis 3. Where are you? Where have you gone? What's the deeper story that you're telling yourself right now? And here's the truth. I want you to walk away from this message with this bottom line and maybe think about it the rest of the week. That your fear, right? Fear is a very human emotion. To be human is to experience fear. But our fears actually are meant to drive us to a deeper understanding about what's causing the fear. Why am I afraid? And more importantly, what or who am I placing my trust, my faith, my love in when I'm afraid? So here's the phrase. Fear reveals faith. Meaning, when I experience fear, and we're getting ready to talk about this in our story, it actually is a way to understand what's happening in the deeper places of my heart, just like a well-placed question of why is it that I'm experiencing fear right now? And here's a spoiler alert for our story. It's not always the storm. It's not just the diagnosis. It's not just the disappointment. It's not just the thing you're thinking about. There's typically a deeper fear if you'll sit with it and allow yourself to examine your heart, which is what Jesus did with these questions. And so let's jump into the very first question in our series. And I want to say there's a card at all the doors. Some of you already grabbed one last week. This just got our series graphic on it. But on the back, more importantly, it's got every single question that we're going to look at over the next 2 months and the corresponding scripture from the Gospels that go along with it. So I want to encourage you to grab one and follow along over the next 2 months. And by the way, this would be a great series for those of you who have people in your life, family members, friends, coworkers, that are asking Jesus questions. Like maybe they've been burned by the church or they're not so whatever, like high on organized religion or whatever, but they're open to talking about Jesus, which by the way, statistically, most people are very open to Jesus, are saying yes to him, but no to the church. So a great way to bridge that gap would be a series like this. We're just going to have Jesus conversations. We're going to talk about Jesus' stories, questions that he asked, and do the deeper work of why did he ask that question and not answer it and allow us to answer it, to go deeper into our stories. So here's the very first one. Why are you afraid? Why are you afraid? Mark chapter 4. And if you have a copy of the scriptures, I want to encourage you, if you're not already there, to open with me. If you have the app, by the way, all of the scriptures and my sermon outline is preloaded there. If you're a fill-in-the-blanker, they've got fill-in-the-blanks that you can fill in the blank and follow along. And I actually have a picture that I want to share with you today that you're going to see on the screens, but if you want to just look at it further this week or zoom in on your phones, it's in the app. So you can get it there. Mark chapter 4. One last thing. We're starting in a couple of weeks our academy, and some of you have been in our New City Academy. It's a way that we try to go deeper, like we're doing in this series, into the teachings of Jesus and the scriptures. We're still in groups, but it's a little bit more of an academic setting. So I think last year altogether we had 400 or 500 people from New City that were in our academy, and we just run it by semester. And it's getting ready to start in September. So if you're new to the church or you're looking for a way to get connected, this is an easy step because it has a start and a stop where you can jump in, meet some people from the church, do some deeper work in your life, and go further in your faith wherever you might be. So I just wanted to really quickly, we're going to be in the Gospel of Mark today, and there's one other time in our series we're going to be in Mark as well. In the Discovering Jesus class, which is the second class listed here, the whole class is just a journey through the Gospel of Mark. So Mark has 16 chapters. Mark has more miracles recorded than any other gospel, and it has less words than any other gospel. So it's action-packed. It's a thriller from start to finish. John Mark wrote it, but he's curating for Peter. So it's really Peter's gospel. And Jen and I are going to teach it together this semester, and we've got some other friends that are joining us to help us lead it. So if you're at a place in your life where you're like, I just want to know more about Jesus, and I want to learn how to study a gospel in the scriptures and like from start to finish, walk through it, and we're going to teach you how to study the scriptures as well as we walk through it. And just literally, whether you're not a Christian yet, you're asking questions about Jesus. We had lots of people in our class last year that are not Christians yet, and I think it was a really safe place to come and just say, this is my hang up, this is my question, whatever, and we do that. We have people that have been following Jesus for 10, 20, 30, 40 years that just want to go deeper in discovering Jesus, because we're always discovering Jesus no matter where we are and following after him. So I just want to make that one known, but there's other great classes up here too while we just have them up. Flourish is our women's Bible study groups. And we have an incredible team that leads that, several hundred ladies that are involved with that. That meets on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So it starts a week earlier than some of our other academy classes. All these are in September, though. So we'd love for you to sign up for that, ladies. If you're looking for a group to be in, they're going to be studying Matthew this year and have worked really hard to prepare that, so you can register online here. Practicing the Way is a new class for us this year. It's based off of John Mark Comer's great work, Practicing the Way. And so we want to just go further with that with spiritual disciplines, if you've ever heard of that, just ways that, tried and true ways that for 2,000 years people have been practicing following Jesus and learning more about those practices together. So if you've never done anything like that, this is a new one for us, and we'll be repeating it, but we'll be starting that one in September. And then our Old Testament, New Testament, we've been teaching now. We're coming into our 4th year of Academy. And this is God's redemptive story. So the Bible is one story from Genesis to Revelation. This is God's redemptive story through the lens of the Old Testament, the 39 books of the Hebrew Testament, and the New Testament, the 27 books of the New Testament, and how all those books fit together, and the thread, if you will, of God's story from start to finish. And I know many of you in here have gone through it. It's an awesome understanding of the scriptures, because let's just be honest, like the Bible can be intimidating, and when you come into it cold, you're like, where do I start, and how does this all fit together? And that's the desire of Old Testament, New Testament, as we're showing how God's story works all the way through it. So I just want to encourage you. We're in Mark today, so I just want to take the opportunity to highlight all of our classes. and just encourage you, if you've been in an academy, to find another one to jump in, or if you haven't experienced academy before, to take the chance to do it. And by the way, you don't have to quit your community group or other thing to do it. We designed it for folks to come and be a part of it on top of what you're doing. Or if this is the only thing you're doing, you have to gauge that in your own life and story. But here they are, okay? So you can take a picture of that and just go to our website, or it's on the app too, and register, and all these start middle of September. Okay, you with me? Like 3 people. Are you guys here in the room still? Okay. Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. Let's come back to our first question, why are you afraid? And just to spin up the story again, Jesus is actually the one, which is an interesting little factoid here in verse 35. He's the one that says, let's go to the other side of the lake. So we need to hold that. It was his desire and purpose to cross the lake, and he knew what they were going to experience as they crossed the Sea of Galilee here. He knew what was coming in the storm. It was his purpose that his disciples would go through it, and he was going to be with them for it. And it doesn't take long, right? Verses 36, 37, look at it with me. For a fierce storm to kick up here on the Sea of Galilee. Now, just a word here, the sea sits, about 600 feet below sea level. So winds would converge, on the land, on the geography around it, and storms would quickly come upon the sea, and they would be very violent in nature, and you wouldn't have a lot of warning. And this one must have been, a storm of all storms, because let's remember in context, many of these disciples were seasoned fishermen on the same sea. So they had seen afternoon thunderstorms. They had been a part of probably a lot of bad storms. And this one, they're all afraid that they're going to die. This is like when you're on the plane and, you start to hit turbulence. If you're like me, I do one thing when that's happening. I look to a flight attendant. Are they still serving drinks? Are they still chatting it up about what they're gonna do? Whatever, or are they in their seats buckled in and look terrified, which I've been on some of those flights before. And by the way, if you're with someone that's just completely, before you even pull away from the gate, is asleep when the engines come on and they sleep through the whole thing, that's terribly annoying, which is what happens here. I've been on a few of those flights, and where I'm like, should I wake them up to die, or should I let them sleep? I don't know. Is that courtesy? You might want to be awake for your death, or you just let them sleep through it. And that's what's happening. So this storm kicks up, and we read here. Look at it with me. Where's Jesus? He's asleep. He's that guy that is asleep through the turbulence, through the storm, and it's bad. Waves are crashing over the side of the boat. It comes up quick. These guys are terrified. They think they're going to drown. And I love, the detail that Peter puts in here through Mark. He says Jesus was asleep with his head on a cushion, which I'm not sure why that's relevant, but somehow he wanted us to know that Jesus grabbed a pillow and is just asleep through all of this. And before we get to Jesus's question, check out the question that they ask. Look at it with me. They ask Jesus, they shout at him. They don't just hey. They're shaking him, right? They're shouting at him. Look at the scripture here. And they ask Jesus, verse 38, "Teacher, don't you care that we're about to drown? We're all gonna die, and you don't even care." And man, isn't that the question that many of us ask either out loud or in our heart, in the middle of our fear when we're going through storms in our life? And I know some of you are in one right now. And somewhere deep down in there, if you sit with it, is, does God care about me? With everything else in the world that's going on and all these other people with problems, does he really care about me? And this is what the disciples are asking. Don't miss this. Do you care? You're sleeping. So what is that communicating to us? You don't care. Is God asleep right now in your storm? Is he aware of what you're going through? It's Yancey's question. Where are you, God, in my disappointments with him? And this is the real scene and context of what's happening here, of the disciples freaking out and wondering, does God care? And here's the deeper question too, by the way. Are you actually able, Jesus, to do something about this? So I think all of us ask in our storms, do you care, God? Or like another way to ask it would be, do you love me? And the other question is, if you do love me, could you actually do something about this? Are you actually powerful enough and strong enough to do something about the storms of my life? And let's come back to our little phrase here. Our fears reveal our faith, or the lack thereof. Or, for many of us, that we're putting our faith, the closest word in the English language that we have to a biblical understanding of faith is trust. So it reveals who or what we're putting our trust in. In this instance, the disciples, of course, are putting their trust in the boat and what they've known their whole lives, that we're gonna get through this storm. And then when it starts to break apart and it feels like they're not gonna get through it, their faith is revealed that what we're putting our trust and our hope in is going to sink. And the same is true for us. God, do you care? Are you able to do something about it? Where am I putting my hope and my trust? That's what our fears reveal. And this is what fear can do, this is the way I would say it, like to us. Have you ever thought about that? What does fear do to you? When you feel afraid, what happens to you? I mean, there's physical things that happen to you when you feel and experience fear. But what's your posture? Like, how do you react when you feel afraid? Like your heartbeat goes up, you start to sweat a little bit, maybe your face gets flushed, whatever. There's physical things that happen to you because your body's saying something's going on here. And we need to do something about this. And many people say that when we experience fear, we react in one of three ways. Have you heard these before? These 3 F's. We fight. Have you heard this? Anybody? We fight. We flight, meaning we flee the scene, like we're out of here. I'm out of here. I don't want to experience it. I don't want to look at it. I just got to get away from this as quick as I can. And then the third one is we freeze. Like, have you ever been the person where like someone pulls a fire alarm or something's going on, people are crawling all over each other and it's the person just sitting at the table. Like, they're not reacting at all because they're so afraid they can't even move. Like, I'm paralyzed by fear. And we probably all experience all of these at any given moment in our storm in our life, but probably all of us have a go-to. And I wonder what your go-to is. Are you a fighter? Are you the type person that's like, hey, if I'm going down swinging. Like, I'm gonna go down working, swinging, do whatever I can do. I'm gonna power my way through this if I can. Like, are you a fighter? For some of you, you're a quote unquote flighter. I gotta get out of here. As soon as trouble happens in your life and, you know, in your job, in your marriage or whatever, like I'm gonna avoid all this. Like, I don't wanna cause a fight between couples here, but like if it's like some of you, and I would probably be in this category, when it starts to get like tense, you're like, I don't wanna talk about this anymore. I don't wanna talk about this anymore. Well, what do you mean you wanna talk about this anymore? I don't wanna talk about it. I'm not gonna talk about it. Because there's something inside of you that's going, danger, 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 I gotta get out of this. And not to get into deep of the waters of the pool here, but probably somewhere deep in your story as a kid, you learned, I gotta get out of this. And so you've carried that now. And so when it happens, even to the person that you love the most and you trust the most in the world, you're like, I can't do this anymore. I gotta get out of this. Some of you are freeze people where you just literally, you're paralyzed with fear. You can't make a decision. You just begin to literally shut down. You can't hear anything. People are giving you instructions and telling, it's just noise. You don't hear it anymore. I brought a picture to maybe illustrate this in the story, because all 3 of these, by the way, are happening in Mark chapter 4. There's disciples that we can read it in the words that are fighting, ones that want to get out of it, ones that are frozen, because all of them aren't talking. There's silent ones here. So this is Rembrandt. This is his Christ in the Storm. Interestingly, this painting was stolen from a museum in Boston and has never been found. So it's probably in somebody's living room. Rembrandt actually painted himself into the picture. So I don't know which one he is, but he's probably thinking, maybe not about the 3 F's, but he's probably thinking, how would I respond in the storm? How do I normally respond? And he paints himself into the picture. So let's just look at it for a moment. And this is on the app if you want to go further with it. I guess it's on the Google machine too that you can find. And you could zoom in, right, to see expressions because it's brilliant how he painted this and just vivid expressions on everybody's face. So we see just disciples, right? We don't know who they are by name, but there's guys that are like trying to pull up the sails and the ropes, and they're working, right? I mean, I would say these are the fight guys. We're gonna work. We're gonna get our way through this storm. We're gonna power through this. We're gonna do whatever we can. Look, the guys at the oar there, still trying to like steer the ship. All right. There's somebody off the side here. I don't know if he's getting sick, or if he's thinking like, I might jump out of this boat. Like, I'm not going down with this boat and these guys. I'm just gonna jump in the water and take my chances. Maybe. There's guys like the guy at the top looks like he's praying. Maybe he's a freeze guy. I'm just gonna pray. There's guys in Jesus's face. One of them has their hand grabbing him. I don't think this is a casual conversation. Maybe pleading with him. Maybe they're angry with Jesus. How could you let this happen to us? Why aren't you doing something about this? I just wonder, because I think art a lot of times is truth with a slant. And so when we look at things like this visually, it's a representation of truth. And Rembrandt was a follower of Jesus and is trying to represent the story here. I wonder where you are in that. I wonder what your reaction would be. Like, let's not make it like a hypothetical, like right now in your own storm in your life, whatever that might be, like where you are in the boat and what are you doing? Now, I think this is where the story really starts, actually. The other parts are important for context, but to me, the story really starts in verse 39. Because now, in chapter 4 of Mark, Jesus is awake. And what is the first thing that Jesus does when he wakes up? Mark chapter 4, verse 39. Mark tells us, he says that Jesus wakes up and he rebukes, circle that word if you're following along in your Bible, he rebukes the wind and the waves, saying, "Silence, be still." Now, this is a direct marker of the psalmist in Psalm 46 where he says, "Be still and know that I'm God." And now Jesus is going to tell the winds and the waves to be still. And the disciples are going to inference, know that he's God, that something is different about this guy. Now, let's remember, just, lest we judge the disciples, they're very new to following Jesus here in Mark chapter 4. They've only been with him for just a little while. They're still getting to know him, and we're gonna see that at the end of the story. And part of what's happening here is Jesus is going to use the emotion that they're feeling, fear and terror at dying, to reveal something deeper in their story so that they can grow in their faith. And that's the same thing that God does for us. He doesn't cause storms, but he allows the storms of life to come through our lives so that it can reveal who and what we're putting our trust in, and we can grow our faith and our trust deeper in him. Because here's the thing, whatever your go-to emotion is of fight or flight or freeze or your reaction to fear, whatever it is, none of them are more moral or sanctimonious than another one. Anything other than looking to Jesus and placing your faith and trust in him is gonna be lacking. So no matter where the guys were on the boat, what Jesus is after is for them to place more and more of their trust in him because of the storm. And in this way, if you're taking notes, to me, this is where it really starts in verse 39, because this is what fear, a real human emotion, can do for us. We talked about what fear can do to us. It can cause us to fight or flight or freeze. But here's, through the power of God and his story in our lives, what it can do for us, that God can actually use the emotion of fear to reveal the deeper things of our heart and to drive us into more faith. And I'm not making this up. This is exactly what happens here. Because Jesus, follow along with me, he rebukes the wind and the waves. He says, silence, be still. And I love this language in the NLT. It says, there was great calm. So now it goes from a storm raging all around them, now it's quiet. And now the story starts. Because in the calm, once they've come through the storm, now Jesus wants to get to the deeper things. What did you just experience? And why did you experience it that way? And so he says, look at verse 40. He says, why are you afraid? And we're going to get an insight here to his question. Do you still have no faith? Double question. Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? Now, if you're still with me here, when Jesus asks you the question, when you come out of your storm in your life, that divorce, that diagnosis, that disappointment, whatever it might be in your life, and he asks you, why are you afraid? I'm sure the disciples are like, you remember like 30 seconds ago when we were in that terrible storm and we were all about to die? That might have something to do with why we're afraid. Maybe there was a smart aleck in the group that even said it, but they're probably all thinking like, is that legit? Is that a legit question? But that wasn't actually the question, was it? Ostensibly, that was the question, why are you afraid? But what he was doing was asking a deeper question, which he does with the second question, which is, do you still have no faith? What Jesus was really saying was not what caused your fear, right, on the outside, but everyone watch this, but what caused your fear on the inside? Where did your fear come from? Because now that the storm has passed, that emotion came from somewhere. This is the deeper work that Jesus is doing here with his disciples. Do you still have no faith? Meaning, are you still placing your faith in anyone or anything other than me? And the answer here is yes, they are. They're still trying to understand who is Jesus and can he be trusted even through the storms. Tim Keller has a commentary on Mark called King's Cross that I would recommend that I studied from this week. And one of the things he says that I think is so important to understand, he says, the premise, and by the way, this is for all of us. It's not just the disciples here. He says that the premise for the disciples at this point in their faith journey, and it is for many of us, by the way, is that if Jesus loved them, he wouldn't let bad things happen to them, including storms. But of course, this isn't true. He allows hard things, bad things to happen around them to drive them deeper into their faith. This is why C.S. Lewis said that God will give us some pleasant little ends along the way, the journey of our life, but he will never allow us to confuse this broken world for our home. And so it's through the pain, it's through the storm, the diagnosis, the disappointment, the divorce, the whatever it might be that God reminds me, oh, I live in a broken world and I wasn't made for this world. I'm on a journey to a place where there is no more pain and brokenness and disease and tears. But until I get there, I'm either in a storm, coming into a storm, or coming out of a storm. And that's the reality. So what's the deeper work that God's doing in my heart? It's driving me further into faith. Keller goes on to say this, I think this is really important. God can love us and still allow bad things to happen because he is God. If you have a God great enough and powerful enough to be mad at because he doesn't stop your suffering, you also have a God who is great enough and powerful enough to have reasons that you can't understand for your suffering. That is a hard word, but it's true. If you have a God that's big enough to stop the storm and to be mad at, you have a God that's big enough to understand the reasons that he allowed it and the deeper things that he wants to do in your heart and your family and your life through it. The storm reminds me that I'm not in control, The storm reminds you that you're going through right now that you're not in control. And a storm, my friends, is a gift that none of us want, but all of us need. We need storms in our life to remind us of the deeper things, to remind us that this world is broken, but we have a God that, don't miss it, Jesus is in the boat with them. He never leaves them. He's in the boat, and he never will leave you. He's in the boat with you. And he's reminding you that no matter what happens, he's going to be with you, and it's going to be okay. If the worst thing happens, it will still be okay. Let's just name out loud. What is the worst thing that could happen? I could die. The people around me that I love in the boat could die. And guess what? Jesus even solved that. It will be okay. And this is the deeper work that God is doing. The storms of our lives can give more than they can take if we allow them to. And so hear the words of Jesus. Hear the words of Jesus in your storm, speaking to my fears, to your fears, when he says, because by the way, he's not really talking to the winds and the waves, is he? He rebukes, which is a spiritual reality. He's rebuking the spirit of fear. And the winds and the waves are just a manifestation of the fear. He's speaking to the deeper things of the heart when he rebukes the winds and the waves. And he's rebuking the fear in our lives. And he's saying, silence, be still. Be still and know that I'm God. And that's the word for each of you in your storm that's raging all around you. I know it. I know it. I know it's happening. And what Jesus is saying is, be still and know that I'm God. Listen to my voice in and through the storm and trust me even more. Now, how does the story for the disciples, and this is, by the way, the goal for each of us, the goal of Jesus for each of us, how does the story resolve? How does it finish? It actually finishes with the disciples asking a question. The question of all questions, which is so cool because of as we think about our work we did today. This is the deeper question. The disciples, after this happens, they look at each other and they say, this is the ultimate question any of us could ever ask. Who is this guy? Who is this man that even the winds and the waves obey him? In other words, who is Jesus? Who is this guy? What are his words? Can he be trusted? Does he care? And boy, are they about to find out as they journey with Jesus over the next 3 years and begin to discover who he is and follow after him. And I want you to see this, okay? I'm finished right here. Chapter 5, verse 1 is actually a part of this story, I think. The first words of chapter 5. And they're words that you need to hear in your storm, in your life, as many of you are in the middle of the boat and the waves and the wind are raging all around you and you're afraid. You need to hear this. Can I read them to you? So they arrived to the other side of the lake. Some of you are going through stuff that you'll never get over. But you will get through it. You may never get over it, but because of Jesus, you will arrive to the other side of the lake. You will get through it. Here's a couple of direct applications from our story today. I'm going to do this every week in our series. Don't know which one the Holy Spirit will use in your life, but here they are, just rapid fire. Where are you in your faith coming into the storm, in the storm, coming out of the storm? Some of you are getting ready to go into one. Some of you are in one. Some of you are just coming out of one. And I wonder where you are in your faith with Jesus. That is the question. Who is Jesus? What are you believing about him in your life because of the storm? Here's the second. Some of you really need to hear this. Going through storms is not a sign that God doesn't love you. If that was the case, then he doesn't love any of these guys. And we know that's not true. We know ultimately he gave his life for each of them and for each of us. He deeply loved them, and he allowed them to experience hard things. Look at verse 35. Jesus said to the disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. He knew exactly what was waiting for them in the middle of the lake in the middle of the night. He was the one that said, let's go through it. Because when you get to the other side, you're gonna know me more. And you're gonna build your faith. And that's what happens in storms. So don't let the enemy confuse you and make you think that because you're going through hard things, that God's given up on you or he doesn't love you. It's not true. Here's the third thing. Jesus doesn't get out of the boat at the end of all this and say to the disciples, like we're pulling up to the gate in the plane, like we got through it. He doesn't look at the disciples when they come up to the other side of the shore and say, you guys are, you guys are a bunch of morons. Like, I got to find a new group. Like, you failed. Like you did not pass the test. You all freaked out and you didn't pass. You don't have enough faith in me. I got to find a new group of people to do ministry and life with. Nope. Gets right out of the boat. Here comes a demon-possessed man, jumps right back into ministry. And they just keep following Jesus. And he just keeps showing himself to them. And that's the same with us. If you failed the test in the storm, God hasn't given up on you. He's just inviting you to follow him again, right into the next story. And by the way, in chapter 5, they get back in the same boat, and guess what they do? They go back to the other side. So they have another chance to trust Jesus. And some of you need to hear that God's giving you more and more chances. He hasn't given up on you. Here's the last thing, our bottom line today, is our fear, right? Remember, your fear reveals your faith. Fear shows us who and what we're believing in. And this story is the story of Jesus in the boat with you, on his tiptoes, screaming out to each of you in the middle of the storm, I am God, and you can trust me. To Christ be the glory today. Let's pray together. God, would you take this word and seal it deep in our hearts today? As we leave here, would you take the things that you've imparted to us through your word and bring them to mind so that we can be changed and we can help to share your story